Welcome back to Old School Sports and our OOTP 23 playthrough of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Appreciate everyone who watches these episodes. If you haven't subscribed yet, would appreciate it from the bottom of my heart if you did. Help us grow the channel. Also, always enjoy comments on what I've done well, what I haven't done well, what I could do differently. So please feel free to share those down below and throw us a like if you get the chance as well if you're enjoying what we're doing. We are at the start of the 2042 playoffs. The regular season ended today. And for the third time in 5 years as general manager of the Pittsburgh Pirates franchise, we are in the playoffs. Barely made it this year. Got the third and final wild card by 4 games over the San Francisco Giants. We finished the season very strongly to ensure that we did get back in the playoffs. And it's Thursday today. On Saturday, we're going to be starting a wild card series at the NL West Division champion Colorado Rockies. So we'll see how that series goes for us. Mentioned that we finished the season very strong. You can see we only lost twice over the last 2 weeks, or 3 times over the last 2 weeks of the season. 10-3 down the stretch. We took 3 of 4 against the Cubs on the road. Took 2 of 3 home against Atlanta. Swept Milwaukee at home, and then took 2 of 3 against Milwaukee on the road. So that turned what was a pretty challenging wild card race into one that, as I mentioned, we did end up winning by 4 games. So in 5 seasons as GM, as I mentioned, we've got 3 winning records now, 3 playoff appearances, wild card each of the last 2 seasons, and we did somehow win the National League Central in our second year running the team. Haven't followed up with that. Looking for a better playoff performance this year, though, despite the fact that we had a home series. We were swept 3-0 in the 2039 playoffs. Last year, we were a road team in the wild card series, and we were swept 2-0 by the Mets. And as I mentioned, we're going to be on the road this year against Colorado. Our first goal is just to win a game, prove that this Pirates team can actually win a game in the postseason. And obviously it would be wonderful if we can prove that we can win a postseason series. And then once we've done that, let's keep going as far as we can. Not going to be any real changes to the playoff roster. I'm going to be going with 12 pitchers and 14 position players. The one guy that had been on our team all season who may end up being an odd man out is first baseman Sean Barley. Hit reasonably well for us as a rookie, 286 batting average and 9 homers, 15 doubles, and 332 at-bats. Almost a run above replacement, but he's pretty one-dimensional. Not that fast, not that good defensively. And with the acquisitions we made during the season of Jaquan Hinton from the Nationals, who played first base for us primarily down the stretch, as well as Arturo Ailman, also from the Nationals, who's kind of filled in at DH for us primarily with a little bit of first base since we picked him up. Don't really need another one-dimensional guy who only hits, doesn't have as much power as either Hinton or Ailman, and only plays one position, not that important position at first base, and is not all that good at it defensively. So Barley ends up losing out. That lets us keep Luis Flores, the Rule 5 acquisition, on the roster. He's obviously more versatile defensively, has some more speed. 270 hitter for us, no power at all, at least in terms of home run power, but gives us a little more versatility defensively to have Flores on the team instead of Barley. So that is the plan. And we did set up our roster. So our fragile but brilliant ace, Luis Longoria will be pitching game 1 of the series. We skipped his last start. You can see he's been fantastic since he's been in the majors. 378 strikeouts in 256 innings, 2.92 ERA, 190 batting average against, put up a 7.6 WAR and a 2.31 SIERA with a 70 FIP minus and a 139 ERA plus in parts of 2 seasons. Started this year on the IL, nursed him back from that injury, kept him on a 90 pitch count throughout the season, and you can see we did end up getting 21 starts out of him. We have increased his pitch count to 100 for the playoffs, and he'll be going in game 1 as we try to finally get a postseason victory for this Pittsburgh Pirates franchise. And we are ready for the playoffs to begin. As I mentioned, Luis Longoria, our young, brilliant ace on the mound for us. Ernesto Tellez on the mound for Colorado. 9-5 this year with a 3.47 ERA. Certainly looks like a solid pitcher, but if we've got any chance of winning this series, I think we've got to win the game where we've got Luis Longoria pitching. Going to be an interesting matchup, kind of very opposite teams. The Rockies were as opposite as you can get, first in the National League in runs scored, last in the National League in runs against, but did have a plus 38 run differential on the year. We were a little more balanced, but still kind of the opposite. Pitching staff was 4th in runs against, but our offense was 10th in runs scored, so just a plus 28 run differential for us over the course of the season, even though we did end up with the same number of wins as the Rockies. But the Rockies dominated the regular season series, taking 5 of 7 games. So they are at home. I'm pretty confident that they are the favorites. Big question is, can we win this first game with Longoria? If we don't win this first game with Longoria, I think it's going to be incredibly tough for us. So let's see if the youngster can come through. And we did get a 5-1 victory. Obviously would assume with Longoria getting the victory that was a good performance by him. Greg Gaylord with the save, got a home run from Ailman, who we added before the trade deadline. So jumped out with 3 runs in the first inning. They came back, and then we added on some insurance runs in the 7th and 9th. Tellez was respectable for them, but Longoria was excellent. 2 walks, 4 hits over 7 innings, struck out 10, got the W. Omar Gaona came in, presumably got a lefty out, and then Gaylord came on and got a 1 2/3 inning save. So the Pirates are finally off the schneid as far as actually winning a postseason game, which is one step in the right direction. And now we are just 1 win away from hopefully winning a postseason series and going on to the NLDS. And it would be huge for us. It sounds like it's not, all that exciting. Oh, you win a postseason series, you go to the NLDS. But we have been steadily, improving. I don't know about steadily improving, but we have improved the play on the field from where the Pirates were before we took over to where they are now that we took over. We've been getting pretty steady improvement in our budget history, but right now we're set up to lose money this year, and I have no idea how penny pinching Bob Nutting is going to react to that. So if we're able to get out of this series and at least get into guaranteeing ourselves 3 more games in a division series matchup, that'll ensure that we generate enough playoff revenue to at least have a profitable season. How much of it he'll put back into the organization, uncertain, but want to at least give ourselves a fighting chance to have that budget continue to move in the right direction, because that's really the only way that we're going to be able to build something here that's somewhat sustainable for the medium to long term. And I did, although I did plan to ensure that Longoria was going to be pitching game 1 at the end of the season by sitting him down the stretch, because we weren't able to move Santana up. he still got his full rest. So we ended up in near the end of the season, the second or the third to last game, we had Omar Gaona start for us, and then I kind of messed up where both Santana and Gotti went on regular rest. So although we got Longoria, our ace, in game one, we're going to get Bobby Gonzalez here, who's technically our fourth starter in game two. Gonzalez 9-9 with a 3.81 ERA, put up a 3.4 WAR on the season. Certainly a good professional pitcher. He's got the opportunity to opt out of his contract after this season, so every start he does for us now could certainly be his last for the Pirates. And then we will have Santana if we do get to a game 3 tomorrow. If not, we'll have, kind of the most proven pitcher on our staff. I guess Gonzalez is probably the most proven pitcher because he's a veteran, but Santana has been a pretty good pitcher for us ever since we brought him up. Can see 1,197 strikeouts in 1,103 innings, 3.78 ERA, put up a 22.2 WAR over the last 6 seasons, coming off the best season of his career with a 5.6 WAR. So if we do end up in a game 3, kind of glad that Santana will be there for us. But hopefully we get by him right now and get the sweep. Jesus Islas looks like a outstanding pitcher, 30-year-old on the mound for Colorado, 12-9 this year with a 3.56 ERA. Good at holding runners, good stamina. He's durable. They certainly have the better pitcher on the mound today, but I'm feeling some magic in these Pirates. And I was right. Well, I don't know if it was really magical, but we did get the win. Ailman with a second home run. Got home runs from Hill and Zion Rose also. So after 2 consecutive sweeps out of the playoffs, our first 2 times in the playoffs with this Pirates franchise, we turned the tables on our opponent and we sweep the Colorado Rockies on the road to move on to the National League Division Series. Ailman with homers in both games is the series MVP. Looking at the box score, Bobby Gonzalez, nice professional job, 2 earned runs over 6 2/3. Elijah Helton came on to get the save and is now apparently experiencing flu-like symptoms that are going to impact him for a couple days. Hopefully the flu doesn't go through our entire roster as we're getting ready for the NLDS. Ailman today 3 for 5 with a run scored and 2 runs driven in. So good performance by the Pirates. Glad that we're finally not completely jinxed and we've actually won a playoff series. Still suggests that we're going to lose money for the year, but we know that we've got at least 3 more games ahead of us, so we will end up being profitable for the season. Might not make a ton of money for old man penny pinching nutting, but hopefully if we make a little bit of money for him, given that we did complete our goal of getting to the playoffs, he'll continue to move our budget and our payroll in a positive direction, and we'll be finding that out after the playoffs are over. So hopefully we've got a lot of games that we'll be playing between now and then. And if we thought the matchup was tough against the Colorado Rockies, it's not going to get easier against the NL East division winning Atlanta Braves. They had a 4-2 record against Pittsburgh this year. They had the 3rd best offense in the National League in terms of runs scored and also had a very good pitching staff, 6th in the NL in runs against. So I guess technically we've got a small advantage with our pitching staff, but they've got a pretty big advantage with their offense, which scored more than half a run a game, more than we did over the course of the season. Before we get into our series, let's take a look at the playoff tree, and Astros and Tigers going up against the Rangers and the Red Sox. In the American League, Cardinals will be hosting the Mets in the other NLDS matchup, and obviously our Pirates are going to be facing off against the Atlanta Braves. So We've got at least one home game left this year on Saturday. The goal is obviously to get one in Atlanta and go home tied. We'll see whether or not we can accomplish that against the Braves. We've got Tony Santana on the mound. Happy to have him on the mound for us. Talked about him earlier, 14-13 record, 3.64 ERA, 236 strikeouts in 215 innings, a career best 5.6 WAR this season with a 76 fit minus. So a excellent right-hander on the mound for us, but we're going up against a pitcher who had an even bigger season, Rod Perales. 18-5 with a 3.44 ERA, struck out 249, did Santana a tenth of a win in WAR better at 5.7, 290 Sierra, 79 fit minus. So two excellent pitchers going up against each other in this Game 1 matchup in Atlanta. And the Pirates with an 11-run outburst. Home runs from Isaiah Hill, Ramon Herrera, Jaquan Hinton, another one of the guys that we picked up before the trade deadline. Obviously a good performance out of Santana. 7 innings pitched, 3 hits, 3 walks, 2 earned runs. Heriberto Rosales comes on with 2 innings of relief. We jumped on Perales early. 7 hits, 7 earned runs, got just 1 out. Oof. Very, very ugly with 7 runs in the first inning, 3 in the second, 1 in the third. Isaiah Hill, 2-run home run in the top of the first inning to put us up 2-0. So can't ask for a better start to the playoffs than that one. We'll move on and find out what's going to happen in day 2 in Atlanta when we'll finally get to see Ricky Gotti on the mound. So thus far, the Pirates' strong finish to the regular season is carried over in the postseason. We've got Ricky Gotti on the mound, 12-12 this year, 3.93 ERA, put up a 4.0 WAR. Gotti, now 30 years old, his final year of arbitration. We were able to keep him at $15.625 million this year. He's been looking for an extension, $22.5 million-ish a year. Odds are we're going to have to let him go, so every time he pitches for us, it can potentially be his last game with us. We'll certainly make him a qualifying offer if he does go into free agency. Honestly, the only way I can possibly see us being able to keep him is if we somehow make a long playoff run to the World Series, generate a ton of money, and Mr. Nutting loosens the purse strings by at least $10 million on our budget for next year, then maybe there's a way for us to fit Ricky Gotti in next year. But even then, it's uncertain. We've got some players with pretty big arbitration numbers coming up. And then obviously, if you've been following the series, you know that we have signed both Tony Santana and Isaiah Hill to pretty lucrative extensions to ensure that those 2 cornerstones remain with our team. So Gotti may end up being someone that we have to move on from, but we've got at least one more start with him today. Going up against Alex Rojas. He's a pitcher who used to be a nemesis of ours back when we were with Kansas City in the American League. Looks like he just was traded actually. It looks like probably right before the trade deadline from Toronto to Atlanta. Hasn't been nearly as effective as he used to be. You look at the ratings and should be a pretty good pitcher. He's an Ironman, so he can go out there every day. 6-4 record with a 4.66 ERA isn't incredibly impressive, but he definitely had some pretty big seasons for Toronto back in the day when we were still in the American League with the Kansas City Royals. But we'll see if we can jump on him today. I said I just wanted to get one in Atlanta, but clearly after you win the first game of the series, not just going to roll over. Let's see if we can get a second win with Ricky Gotti today. And the Pirates do get a 5-2 win. Our pitching, which is what we've kind of built this thing around, has been pretty good in the playoffs. Another home run from Isaiah Hill. Gotti gets the win. Our closer, Collazo, comes in and gets the save. Once again, we jumped on him early. 3 runs in the first, 1 in the second, and then we just never looked back. Isaiah Hill, I mentioned, 4-time All-Star in 4 seasons in the majors. Another 2-run home run in the first to put Pittsburgh up 2-0. So it's been the exact same movie for Atlanta these first 2 games of the series, and it literally is the exact same movie. Is Rojas only goes a third of an inning, so 2 straight games where the Atlanta pitchers only go a third of an inning. In Rojas's case, he was ejected. Him and Arturo Ailman were ejected for a bench-clearing brawl, but we still got to the bullpen early. Gotti, 7 hits and 3 walks, so he was not his sharpest with 10 base runners over 5 2/3 innings, but did allow only two runs, 2 earned to score. Jones came on to get him out of a jam, most likely in the 6th, pitched 2 1/3, good innings of relief, and then Collazo with the save. So we are headed home in control of this series. Almost wish we didn't have an off day tomorrow. Just kind of want to keep our foot on the throttle and just keep running while we are beating up on the Braves. You never know what can happen with a day of rest, but we'll find out tomorrow. Things have been going obviously as well as we could possibly hope in the playoffs so far, with 4 consecutive victories. And we've got our stud back on the mound for Game 3. Luis Longoria got the win in the first game of the Colorado series. Going to be back on the mound today against Tony Ballesteros. 7-9 record, 4.69 ERA for the 34-year-old. Looks like a good solid pitcher. Was an all-star in 2040 in Texas, so not that long ago. But I would think that the pitching matchup has to favor the Pirates and Luis Longoria. And as much as I say I want to generate as much admissions revenue as possible for this team, I also want to win as many games as possible. And I'd prefer to just get this series over today, not mess around, even if it means we'll have 1 or 2 less games in this series. Moving on to the next round is certainly what our ultimate goal is. So Tony Ballesteros against Luis Longoria. Let's see if our ace can come through. And he did. The Pittsburgh Pirates have swept the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, beating the Rockies on the road 2-0, and now taking out the mighty Atlanta Braves 3-0. Got a home run today from John Herrera, who named series MVP after the way that Hill had jump-started our offense those first couple games. Maybe a little bit of a surprise, although Herrera did hit .455 for the series. Isaiah Hill, interesting. Those 2 2-run home runs were his only hits in the entire series. So got a lot of press with those first inning home runs to get us off to good starts in games 1 and 2, but really didn't do too much else. So you may remember we made a trade with Texas on New Year's Day this year to bring Herrera on board. He's a guy that is due to have a big arbitration number next year. We brought him on board kind of thinking that we wouldn't be able to keep him. And during the regular season, he was much less productive for us than he had been in Texas each of the last couple seasons. We kind of brought him on board thinking, hey, this is a really good offensive catcher, and he didn't end up being that for us this year. But he does come through in a big spot in the playoffs, wins the NLDS MVP award. You can see Longoria was brilliant, did walk 5 batters, but only allowed 2 hits, 1 earned run over 7 innings, striking out 10. Helton and Collazo each with a scoreless inning in relief. And Herrera with that 3-run home run in the 2nd inning was the difference maker. Once again, we got on got an early lead from Atlanta, early lead on Atlanta. Had to wait till the second inning to do it today, but these Pirates have, particularly in this series against Atlanta, just jumped on them early and then held on with good pitching. So the Mets are up 2-0 on the Cardinals. It looks like we'll most likely be facing the Mets rather than the team that beat us by 12 games in the NL Central in the Cardinals. But whoever we play, we're going to be happy to be there because the Pittsburgh Pirates are on to the National League Championship Series. And the Mets did end up sweeping their series, so we both had a few days off getting ready for the National League Championship Series. Before we get into that, though, let's just check in on the accounting, and you can see we've played enough playoff games that we are going to make a profit for this season, which is good. Obviously, the main goal is to win it all, but particularly giving the prickly penny pinching owner that we're dealing with, always want to make sure that we're making some money for him. So hopefully that means we'll get a budget increase in the off season. But the primary focus right now is the Mets. Taking a look at the playoff tree. The chalk won in the American League with the Astros and the Tigers both moving on. But it's been a couple teams coming out of the wild card here in the National League. The Mets had a better regular season than we did, but they did finish behind the Braves in the NL East. And you may remember that the Mets took us out 2-0 in the wild card series of 2041 last year, with both games being at Citi Field. We're obviously going to be on the road for the first couple games of this series before we get to go back to Pittsburgh. But we'll see if we can get some revenge on the Mets for last season. Tony Santana back on the mound in Game 1 for the Pirates. Going up against Tristan Champion, 17-7, 2.73 ERA, a two-time Cy Young Award winner who is a 8-time All-Star, one of the premier pitchers in baseball, clearly. So we've got a guy that we feel pretty comfortable with on the mound in Tony Santana, but certainly being the home team and having a great pitcher like Champion on the mound, the Mets have got to be favored in Game 1 of this series. You can see this is a tough matchup for us. We did split the regular season series with them. They were 4 games better than us in the regular season, but they are better than us both offensively and defensively. They were 9th in runs scored 18 runs more than we did. And their pitching staff is first in the National League in runs against, and they allowed 95 fewer runs than we did. So just an exceptional pitching staff from the Mets this year. So we are 5-0 in the playoffs right now. Las Vegas certainly thinks that the Pirates are going to get their first loss of the playoffs today. Let's find out whether or not they are right. And they were right. And what a game. A 1-0 incredible pitchers duel. They got a run on us in the 6th. Held us to just 3 hits. Only 6 hits for them. So a brilliant pitching duel between Champion and Santana. Santana 7 2/3 innings. 6 hits, 1 walk, 1 earned run allowed. Champion and Nance combined for 9 innings of 3-hit ball, shutting out the Pirates. 1 run came off of James Chisholm. I saw the J. Chisholm, and I was thinking of Jazz Chisholm, but it's 2042. He would not be playing anymore at that point. But James Chisholm with the solo homer in the 6th inning off of Santana is the difference. The only hits for Pittsburgh off the bats of Hinton, Linares, and Cota. So after a brilliant start to the postseason, the Pirates finally do lose a game. But quite honestly, as I said with the pitching matchup, even though we had Santana on the mound, being in New York and being up against Champion, they certainly would have been the favorites for that game. Question is whether we can kind of steal one on the road now. We'll see what the matchup looks like. We've got our ace, Longoria, on the mound, who's been brilliant in the playoffs, but Willis Cabello also has been very good in the playoffs. 10-14 this year with a 3.98 ERA, so it looks like he may be one of the less effective pitchers on the Mets staff. We'll see if we can steal one in Queens. And we do not. Another one-run game, 3-2, and it looks like Collazo coming out of the bullpen may have blown a lead for us. No, didn't blow a lead. It was a tie game. We took a 2-0 lead, gave up 2 in the 6th, and then in the 10th inning, Juan Espinoza run-scoring single to give them the win, the walk-off in the bottom of the 10th. Another good pitching performance for the Pirates from Luis Longoria, struck out 11 over 7 innings. Greg Gaylord came on, and then Collazo went 1 2/3 innings, ultimately giving up the game-winning hit. Cabello, solid performance for the Mets, striking out 10 over 7 innings, and then Nance with 3 innings of perfect relief ends up getting the W. Impressive performance there by Nance. Not a lot of offense again by Pittsburgh, just 4 hits. Linares with the only 2-hit game. Hinton and Linares with the runs driven in. Ailman and Hinton with the runs scored. Isaiah Hill 0 for 4, struck out 4 times today. So the good news is we get to go to Pittsburgh next. The bad news is we are down 2-0. Our pitching has been excellent, but as I mentioned at the start of the series, the Mets pitching, at least according to what they did over the course of the regular season, is much better than ours, as good as our pitching has been. And they've proven the ability to score the extra run when they needed it. Only 6 runs scored in the first 2 games of the series, but the Mets have 4 of them and the Pirates only have 2. So the pressure is going to be ratcheted up to another level when we're back in Pittsburgh for Game 3. And it looks like over in the American League, thus far, the Tigers are routing the Astros in the ALCS. But we're getting routed here in the NLCS, and that's what we have to fix today in Pittsburgh. Ricky Gotti on the mound for Pittsburgh, what could be his last start ever for the Pirates. Jose Diaz on the mound for the Mets. 25-year-old was 10-10 with a 2.84 ERA this year. Put up a 3.4 WAR on the season. Certainly has a nice pitching profile. We're going to have to figure out how to score some runs. We've got another guy on the mound who can give us a good performance, but we've gotten good performances from our pitchers in each of the first 2 games, and it just hasn't been enough. Need to score some runs today against Diaz to get this series back to being competitive. And we do get some runs. Pittsburgh gets their first win of the NLCS, 6-4 over the Mets. Gotti with the W, Diaz with the loss. Collazo redeems himself with the save. 4 home runs from the Mets, all solo homers for their runs. Doesn't look like any home runs from Pittsburgh. Tony Cota, 2-run double, one of the big hits in the game. Gotti, solid, probably didn't have his best stuff, giving up 4 earned runs over 7 1/3. Gaona came on and got an out, presumably against a lefty. Gaylord closed out the 8th, and then Collazo on for his 3rd save in the playoffs in the 9th inning. Scored a couple runs off of Diaz. I wonder if he got hurt. He only did 39 pitches. Yeah, he was injured while pitching. Isaiah Hill from our team ties the NL playoff game record with 3 doubles today. Nice, Isaiah. So after Diaz got injured, we scored some runs off Kennedy, got an unearned run off of Avale. Big game for Isaiah Hill, 3 for 3, 3 doubles, runs scored, 2 runs driven in, a walk, stolen base, caught stealing, did just about everything out there for us. But the offense for Pittsburgh finally woke up today, which was needed. Going to have another tough one tomorrow, I'm sure, but it's always good to always good to get a win at home. And now if we get a win at home today, then we're really making this a series. Or win at home tomorrow, actually, since we haven't actually simmed ahead to today at this point. Bobby Gonzalez, the veteran, similar to Gotti, could be making his final start for the Pirates. Will be on the mound for the Pirates in Game 4. On the mound for the Mets, Danny DeLeon. Solid pitcher, 15-5 this year with a 2.61 ERA. Solid 3-pitch arsenal, plus stuff, plus movement, plus control. 32-year-old all-star this season with the Mets, and he was a world champion in 2037. So that was, I think he was with, I think 36 was the last, okay, 2037 when he was a rookie. I was going to say, I didn't recognize the name, but that was the year, 2037 was the year that Kansas City's 3 World Series championships in a row stopped, and that was our last season in Kansas City. So I was going to say I didn't recognize the name. I would think I would remember a guy who was on our staff when we won the World Series, but he won that World Series with Boston. So another tough pitching matchup. I think the runs are probably going to be hard to come by. Can the Pirates even things up? And we cannot. Another close game, a 2-run game. De Leon outpitched Gonzalez. No home runs in this series for the Pirates yet through 4 games against this excellent Mets pitching staff. De Leon was really good. 2 hits and 2 walks over 7 innings. Nance did give up a couple runs in relief. Bobby Gonzalez kind of hung in there. Ugly performance if you look at the 9 hits and the 4 walks over 5 1/3 innings, but did only allow 3 earned runs to score. So even though he didn't have his best stuff, he tried to gut it out, ended up getting the loss. Tony Jones gave up a run in relief, and then Willie Arenales came on for the last inning in 2/3. Could be our last game of the season tomorrow here in Pittsburgh. Could be our last home game of the season, even if we win it. We'll see what happens. We're going to be going back up against champions, so a very tough matchup for us. We'll have Santana back on the mound in a rematch of that brilliant pitcher's duel in Game 1. Can Tony Santana and the Pirates turn the tables on Tristan Champion and the Mets here in Game 5? And they cannot. Looks like another good pitching game. Santana was not involved in the decision, so it looks like they got to the bullpen. Not a single home run from the Pirates in this 5-game series. We've built this Pirates team around pitching, and we pitched well enough to win against most teams, but we were up against a brilliant pitching staff in the Mets, best in the National League, and we just had trouble scoring runs in the series, unfortunately. Did get 8 hits today, which was one of our better offensive outputs in the series. Hinton drove in Isaiah Hill for the only run. Santana honestly did his job. 6 hits, 2 walks, 1 earned run over 6 innings. Finishes the playoffs with a 1.74 ERA. Elijah Helton, though, was not good in relief after an excellent regular season. 2 hits, 3 walks, 2 earned runs over 2 innings. Collazo came on in the 9th for us, but we're just not able to generate much offense. We got a run off of Champion. But then Morones and Sanabria combined for 3 scoreless innings of relief. So the Mets bullpen was the difference when it mattered. And after a really nice run through the playoffs for these Pittsburgh Pirates, our 2042 season is over. I assume, I haven't been following closely what's been going on in the National League, in the American League, but unless there was a big upset, it's going to be Mets and Detroit in the World Series. Yeah, Detroit ended up sweeping. That's obviously been out there. I just haven't paid much attention to it. So an excellent regular season for the Pirates. Got back into the playoffs for the third time in 5 years and had by far our best playoff performance, sweeping through a wild card season, sweeping through a wild card series, sweeping through a NLDS matchup before falling 4-1 to the dominant New York Mets pitching staff in the 2042 National League Championship Series. So before we find out who's going to win the World Series between the Mets and the Tigers, time to take a look at top performers and bottom performers and how everybody did on the Pirates this year. We've already spent a lot of time talking about the pitching staff as we've gone through the playoffs, so I don't think there's really anything else to add there. Longoria and Santana will be back next year. Ricky Gotti and Bobby Gonzalez, who knows? Gotti set to make a ton of money as a free agent, and Gonzalez has the opportunity to opt out of his contract. So we could have a very different looking starting rotation next year. Heriberto Rosales is kind of the guy that we've had as our number 5 starter most often over the past 5 years. He will likely be back in the rotation next year. Omar Gaona could be. Nick Jarmon had a nice year for us. ERA did rise a bit over the end of the season, 3.91 ERA, but 84 strikeouts, 89 and 2/3 innings for the Rule 5 acquisition. Good personality. He's probably going to be back with us next year. Willie Arenales, his number in arbitration could be getting higher, but would like to have him back. Similar with Tony Jones. Elijah Helton and Greg Gaylord, a similar situation. Both of those guys had pretty good years out of the bullpen for us, but their arbitration numbers are getting higher. And then Manny Collazo, his arbitration number going to be close to $7 million. So we've got a lot of pitchers who are in line for pretty significant raises. We're most likely going to lose Gotti. We'd like to bring back as many of these relievers as possible, but I believe Collazo, Gaylord, Helton, Jones, and Arenales are all arbitration eligible. Jarmon is still going to be a major league minimum next year, and then Rosales and Gaona we signed last offseason to extensions, so they will be back. So the question with the pitching staff as we head into next season is going to be simply of those arbitration eligible players. You know, Arenales is looking for a raise to about $5.1 million. Helton, $6.5 million. Gaylord, $3.2 million. Tony Jones, $3 million. And there's one other guy that I was talking about in that mix, Collazo, $6.9 million. So some pretty big numbers, you know, none of them independently are deal breaking, but to bring back all 5 of those pitchers for $25 to $30 million across the 3 of them, 6.2, 12.7. I know it's exciting to watch me do math. 17.8, 25.7 million. You know, 5 relievers at $5 million a year probably starts getting a little tricky for these Pirates. And you can see we were at $98 million this year. We're already close to $20 million above that for next year. And that's with nothing for Ricky Gotti on the books. You know, he would be a addition to our payroll. Positively, only Ricky Gotti and Zion Rose are definitely coming off the books for next season, and I guess Ailman also, since we had the Nationals retain his entire contract, but he's a free agent now. So we're going to have some decisions to make with the pitching staff. Clearly, we saw that there's at least one pitching staff in the National League that's clearly superior to ours with what we ran into in the Mets in the NLCS. We have been preparing for the potential departure of Ricky Gotti and Bobby Gonzalez. The big preparation we did for that was the trade for Jose Montoya last offseason when we traded away the number 4 prospect in baseball to bring on a top pitching prospect in return. He was 14-11 with a 3.98 ERA in AAA for us. Still working on his control, still working on his slider, but it's pretty unlikely that we're going to have all of our pitchers back next year, which means that Montoya is probably going to need to play a pretty significant role at the major league level if we're going to get this Pirates team back into the playoffs next season. In turning to our position players, we talked about Herrera a little bit. Going to be tough to bring him back with that arbitration number that he's looking for if we decide that we have to move on from that contract. And obviously we'll have a better sense of what extent we need to move on from some expensive contracts when we do finally find out what our budget is for next year. Did not hit nearly as well as we had hoped, but still a much better catcher with the bat than what we've typically had over our 5 years in Pittsburgh. Zion Rose, we made the trade to bring him on from Colorado. Kind of interesting that we ended up facing Colorado in the playoffs after they traded him to us. Unlikely that we'll have the 37-year-old back next season, but you never know. Luis Flores, the Rule 5 acquisition, hit 270 in 256 at-bats. Has a good personality, has some speed, can bunt, versatile defensively, albeit not great defensively. Probably has a role on the team next year. The nice thing is that now that we've kept him up this whole year, we can have him in AAA next year if we decide he needs a little more seasoning. You can still see in terms of avoiding strikeouts and making contact. Our scout thinks there's still some potential growth, but good to have him on board. Jaquan Hinton did not hit the way that we hoped after we picked him up in the trade from the Nationals. He is obviously unlikely to come back. $7.4 million. I don't know if it's obvious he's not going to come back, but you look at him at $7.4 million in arbitration, and you look at John Herrera close to $12 million in arbitration. Clearly, with the fact that we're already about $20 million over what we spent this year, hopefully we'll get a bump in the budget to kind of make up some of that gap, but pretty unlikely that both Herrera and Hinton will be back, and it's certainly possible that neither of them will be back. Jaden Dixon, second baseman, should be back next year. Pretty versatile player defensively, good personality. Hit only 231 in 273 at-bats, but did have 20 doubles, has some decent gap power. His arbitration number is not going to be that bad. He could definitely be back as a utility infielder. Victor Serrano, our second baseman, going to be making $1.5 million again next year. Hit only 214 this year. He does have a really nice glove. Would feel better if he hit a little better, but probably will still be in the mix for us again next year because we're probably going to have to be moving on from our third baseman, Luis Linares, another arbitration-eligible player, going to be making close to $10 million. Did not hit as well this year as he did last year when he led the league in doubles, but still was a slightly positive offensive player in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus. We did move him to third base from shortstop. Part of the reason why his WAR was so much lower is that although he's a very good defensive third baseman, just not going to have as much an impact there as a shortstop typically would. We moved him to third because we brought Tony Cota on board. And he's just got a brilliant glove, great personality, and he hit 270 for us. I mean, if he hits 270 for us every year, he's a pretty valuable player. Not a lot of power, doesn't walk all that much, still a below-average offensive player. But with that glove, he can still be a positive player for us. So happy to have Cota back. If we do move on from Linares, you may remember that in the trade that I mentioned where we brought on Montoya, when we traded away Angel Aguilar, who did have a pretty big season with the Angels. He was the number 4 prospect in baseball. And he burst onto the scene with the Angels, 287 batting average, 45 homers, 108 ribbies. As I've talked about, we've got we've got a lot of good outfielders coming, and we knew we were possibly giving up the best hitter among them in Aguiar, but there's no question that he had a monster year, even led the league in on-base percentage with 104 walks. So we certainly didn't rip the Angels off, but as I mentioned, I think Montoya is going to be able to help our starting rotation next year. And then we also picked up Ethan Fox, who, if we move on from Linares, could become our starting third baseman next year. Hit 256 in Double-A this year, brought him up to Triple-A towards the end of the year, where he hit even better, 296. You can see he's pretty versatile defensively, but you look at his ratings with that arm and pretty decent range. If you're going to play him anywhere, third base is the place to play him. If, as we are going through our decisions this offseason on our everyday players, I already mentioned that Linares, Hinton, and Herrera all have pretty expensive arbitration numbers. If Linares is one of the ones that we move on from, then hopefully we've got a replacement in AAA for him at third base. Isaiah Hill, what's there to say? He's been in the major league 4 years, 4-time All-Star, after hitting 289 with 46 homers and 136 runs driven in. Presumably he's going to get a fourth Silver Slugger award. He's won 2 MVPs already, as well as a Rookie of the Year. Lowest WAR of his career this year at 5.6. Probably pretty doubtful that he's going to get a third MVP award this season, but he is obviously a cornerstone of our team. Have him signed for many years to come. These next 2 years at $13 million and $18 million are years that were below what he was expected to make in arbitration when we signed him to the extension. But you can see when he gets into the free agency years that we bought out, the numbers start getting very high, especially for a team like the Pirates. So glad that we got back into the playoffs with him this year and made another run at things. Want to keep him around for as long as possible, since he is by far our best offensive player. But at some point, we just might not be able to afford him. Ignacio Carbajal, backup center fielder, really good defensively. Not much of a bat, but he did hit 308 in only 91 at-bats this year. We've got him signed for $3.2 million next year, and then a team option. Is getting to the point where, since we also have center fielder Ramon Herrera signed, he hit only 228 for us this year, but did have 22 homers, 32 doubles, 17 steals. He's a more dynamic offensive player, not quite as good as Carbajal defensively, but we've gotten him signed for $1.5 million for the next few seasons. So I do kind of feel that Carbajal at over $3 million may be a luxury that we just can't afford, even though he is good defensively, so could move on from him. Arturo Ailman, talked about the fact that he hit really well, helped propel us into the playoffs, hitting 307 with 14 doubles, 9 home runs, over 215 at-bats after we picked him up. He is headed to free agency, assuming he's looking for a very big number at $21.5 million a year. So he's not quite looking for Ricky Gotti money, but certainly extremely unlikely that Ailman will be back with us. Alex Perkins kind of had a bit of a sophomore slump after winning Rookie of the Year last season. Batting average dropped 52 points, hit 10 fewer homers, and drove in 34 fewer runs. Just not a great offensive season from him. You can see he was actually a little below average offensively, at least according to OPS Plus and WRC Plus. And for WAR, he was basically a replacement level player this year after putting up a 4.5 WAR as a rookie. With the help that we do potentially have coming for our outfield, and the fact that he profiles as a above average offensive player, but not necessarily an incredible offensive player, he's another guy that we may have to move on from, sooner rather than later, which is kind of sad. Part of the reason, though, that we could move on from him is Alfredo Velasquez. Also struggled to make contact, hitting just 223 this year and striking out 129 times in 399 at-bats. but he did hit 29 home runs, drove in 58. One-dimensional slugger, certainly, but still was a positive player in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus. Certainly going to be back with us next year, making the major league minimum. At some point, he'll start making more money, but we definitely have some decisions to make because, as I mentioned, at the very least, Ailman, Herrera, Hinton, and Linares are all headed to free agency and or very expensive arbitration numbers. And then we've got some other decisions to make with some players who aren't quite as expensive. So could be a different looking Pirates team next year than it was this year, but that's part of the fun of the game. Not going to be able to keep everybody on the Pirates. I think we've done a pretty good job kind of churning through players so far while getting the cornerstones like Isaiah Hill and Tony Santana signed. But we're going to have some big decisions to make this coming off season. There's no doubt about it. And still waiting for the World Series to finish up, but some awards. Pitcher of the Year, Bobby Astorga in Double-A. And he was only up there for a little while, but he put up a 2.26 ERA in high A ball with an 8-7 record. Then Double-A 5-2 with a 2.81 ERA. Looks like he could be a arm for us at the major league level. Probably kind of a number 5 starter or a middle reliever. But for a 4th-round draft pick in 2039, he's been progressing pretty nicely through the farm system for us. And after an epic World Series, the Mets did end up World Series champions, 4-3 over the Detroit Tigers. So congratulations to the New York Mets, your 2042 World Series champions. And we are about to get the off-season going. You can see one bad piece of news, which was largely anticipated. Bobby Gonzalez has opted out, so he, in addition to Ricky Gotti, is heading to free agency from our starting rotation. Arbitration begins, off-season begins, losing some personnel. But the most important information, what will Mr. Nutting have to say? But before we look at that, let's see what Bobby Gonzalez is looking for money-wise. Actually, he opted out of a $4 million contract. He's only looking for about $4.5 million, so we may be able to bring him back. He's getting older, but he's still a pretty respectable major league starter. So that'll be one big decision for us. Reviewing the season goals, he's thrilled we got to the playoffs. Not upset that we didn't upgrade at second base. Happy we brought on a team leader. Wants to see more attendance. He can't be too upset at a playoff team, but he's still hoping for more from these Pirates. Happy with our performance, happy with our team handling. He wants us to sign Bobby Gonzalez now that he's opted out, reach the World Series in the next couple years, increase attendance. Contract only extended for 1 year, so he's not giving us a strong vote of confidence. Does he give us a vote of confidence with a budget? $142 million available. That, I can't remember where we were at, but that does not sound like a good number to me. Yeah, he took us back by $2 million, so we achieved his goal of making the playoffs. We made money during the season. We got to the National League Championship Series with a budget that at the time was 28th in baseball, and a payroll that was 28th in baseball. And he still cut us back $2 million in terms of our budget for next year. So we're obviously way over where we need to be. As we talked about, we've got a lot of arbitration-eligible players, and the cut to our budget is going to make it even harder to hang on to many, if any of them. So it's going to be it's going to be a pretty challenging off season for these Pirates, but I guess it always is with the Pirates. Would have hoped that. I mean, it's just like it's a tough team to manage because, as I said, we ended up making money last season. We made over $8 million. We made the playoffs. We got this team to the National League Championship Series. And the result of that is that our budget gets cut by $2 million, and he gives us a lame duck 1-year extension. So we've got a lot of work to do in the coming off season, and we're going to start thinking about it now. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.